中国人民的伟大领袖毛主席说：“人民是决定的因素，依靠人民的团结和斗争，必能战胜帝国主义和他们的走狗。”1970年5月20日，中国人民的伟大领袖毛主席发表庄严声明：“全世界人民团结起来，打败美国侵略者及其一切走狗。”毛主席说：“得道多助，失道寡助。弱国能够打败强国，小国能够打败大国。”毛主席的声明是对巴勒斯坦阿拉伯人民反击斗争的巨大支持。阿拉伯人民团结起来，为美国侵略者提起一切走狗。是巴勒斯坦人民对手的小百姓主义，无党不文明。巴勒斯坦人民必胜，为帝国主义逼反。全世界人民必胜！战斗吧，英雄的巴勒斯坦人民！中国人民支持你们，全世界人民支持你们！战斗吧，英雄的阿拉伯人民！胜利一定属于你们！不要和平解决，不屈膝投降！100万个不！人民绝不低头，人民绝不屈服！我们的人民沿着胜利的道路昂首向前，不见解放的曙光，绝不迷路。
中东是一片发展沃土，但这片土地上战火仍在延烧。去年10月以来，巴以冲突剧烈升级，人民遭受沉重苦难。战争不能再无限继续，正义也不能永久缺席。两国方案更不能任意动摇。中方坚定支持建立以1967年边界为基础，以东耶路撒冷为首都，享有完全主权的独立的巴勒斯坦国，支持巴勒斯坦成为联合国正式会员国，支持召开更大规模、更具权威、更有时效的国际和会。
Before we start our video, we should know some key terms and concepts. Palestinian nationalism. This term encapsulates the political and cultural movement that seeks to establish and maintain a sovereign Palestinian state as representative of the Palestinian people's identity and national rights. Khalidi, 1997. Zionism refers to the nationalist movement advocating for the establishment and support of a Jewish national state in what is historically referred to as the Land of Israel. This ideology plays a crucial role in shaping Israeli policies and perspectives regarding the conflict. Herzl, 1896. 1.0 Introduction to Philosophy. Research objective. Examine how the philosophical underpinnings of Zionism and Palestinian nationalism influence the respective claims to land and nationhood. Research question. How do the philosophical underpinnings of Zionism and Palestinian nationalism shape their respective claims to land and nationhood?
Introduction to Philosophy. The philosophical roots of Zionism and Palestinian nationalism intricately shape their respective narratives and claims to land and nationhood, each deeply influenced by unique historical, religious, and cultural contexts. Zionism, as a philosophical and nationalist movement, emerged in the 19th century amidst increasing persecution of Jews in Europe. It advocated for the return of Jews to their ancestral homeland, which they regard as a biblical promise and historical necessity, reinforced by the devastations of the Holocaust. This movement posits that establishing a Jewish state in the land of Israel is essential not just for cultural and religious reasons but as a safe haven for Jews worldwide. In contrast, Palestinian nationalism developed in the early 20th century, largely in response to the geopolitical shifts in the Middle East and the rising immigration of Jews to Palestine. It is rooted in the historical presence and continuity of Arab populations in the region, emphasizing the cultural and familial ties that Palestinians have to the land. The narrative encompasses themes of dispossession and resistance against what they perceive as settler colonialism, framing their national identity around the right to self-determination and the return to their homeland. These philosophical underpinnings not only justify each group's claims to the land but also perpetuate a complex dialogue about international law, historical justice, and national memory. They influence diplomatic negotiations, international relations, and the internal politics of each society, embedding deep-seated beliefs that impact the feasibility and nature of potential solutions to the conflict.
2.0 Philosophy in Life. Research objective. Assess the ethical dilemmas presented by the conflict and their impact on the daily decision-making processes for individuals within Israeli and Palestinian societies. Research question. In what ways do the ethical dilemmas presented by the conflict impact daily decision-making for both Israelis and Palestinians?
Philosophy in Life. The ethical dilemmas arising from the Israeli-Palestinian conflict profoundly affect daily life and decision-making for both Israelis and Palestinians, challenging individuals and leaders to navigate a landscape rife with moral complexities. For Israelis, ethical considerations often revolve around security measures, such as military operations and checkpoints, which they deem necessary for protection but which also raise profound questions about the human rights of Palestinians. These dilemmas extend to debates over land rights, settlement expansions, and the legal treatment of Palestinians, both within Israel and in the occupied territories, constantly testing the balance between national security and adherence to democratic values. Palestinians face their own set of ethical challenges, primarily around the forms and implications of resistance. The ethical debate for many involves considering actions that range from peaceful protests to armed conflict, weighing the immediate needs for self-defense and expression against long-term goals for peace and international support. Furthermore, Palestinians grapple with issues of governance, including how to address internal corruption and how to maintain unity within diverse political factions under the stress of occupation. These ethical dilemmas permeate everyday interactions, shaping policies, influencing community relations, and affecting international perceptions. They contribute to a pervasive sense of moral urgency and ambiguity, affecting decisions that range from voting in elections to participating in protests, from educational curricula to media narratives.
3.0 Human Concepts, Psychology and Sociology. Research objective. Study how trauma and psychological stress manifest in communities affected by the Israeli-Palestinian conflict and understand the conflict's impact on social structures and interpersonal relationships. Research question. How do trauma and psychological stress manifest in communities affected by the Israeli-Palestinian conflict?
Human Concepts, Psychology and Sociology. The psychological and sociological impacts of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict are profound, manifesting as widespread trauma and chronic stress among both populations. This trauma is not only a result of direct violence but also stems from the constant uncertainty and disruption of normal life. In Palestinian communities, the psychological effects are compounded by economic hardships, restricted movement, and the regular experience of military operations. Studies indicate high levels of PTSD among children and adults, with ongoing exposure to conflict environments leading to long-term emotional and psychological distress. Similarly, Israeli communities, particularly those near conflict zones or targeted by rocket attacks, exhibit significant stress and trauma responses. The constant threat of violence fosters anxiety and fear, which can influence public opinion, political decisions, and personal mental health. Moreover, the military engagement required of most Israeli citizens embeds the experience of conflict deeply within the national psyche, affecting their worldview and interactions with the Palestinian narrative. These psychological burdens are passed down through generations, with parents transmitting their fears and biases to children, perpetuating cycles of mistrust and hostility. Socially, this leads to increased xenophobia, aggression, and a fortified sense of in-group versus out-group, which can exacerbate community tensions and hinder peace efforts.
4.0 Epistemology. Research objective. Analyze how media representations and educational systems shape the global and local understanding of the conflict. Research question. How do media representations and educational systems shape the epistemological understanding of the conflict for global audiences?
Epistemology. Media representations and educational systems play crucial roles in shaping the epistemological framework within which global audiences understand the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. Media outlets, depending on their cultural, political, or geographical biases, portray the conflict in varying lights, often emphasizing aspects that resonate with their audience's preconceived notions. For instance, Western media might focus on the narratives of terrorism and security, influenced by broader geopolitical interests and domestic politics, while Middle Eastern media might highlight aspects of occupation and resistance, reflecting regional solidarity with Palestinian aspirations. Educational systems in Israel and Palestine embed these national narratives into their curricula, teaching history, civics, and literature from perspectives that reinforce their respective ideologies. In Israel, the education system emphasizes the historical justification for a Jewish state, celebrating national heroes and pivotal events that underscore Jewish sovereignty and resilience. In Palestine, education focuses on the narrative of displacement, resistance, and national identity, fostering a sense of continuity and purpose in the face of adversity. These epistemological influences shape not only how individuals perceive the conflict but also how they engage with the world's understanding of it. They determine the information that people consider to be true, the stories that are told and retold, and the historical records that are emphasized or omitted. This shaping of knowledge affects international policy, diaspora communities' engagement, and the potential for empathy and understanding between conflicting sides.
5.0 Logic. Research objective. Identify logical fallacies in public and political discourses surrounding the conflict. Research question. What logical fallacies might be identified in the public and political discourses surrounding the conflict?
Logic. Logical fallacies pervade public and political discourse about the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, often distorting the dialogue and complicating efforts towards understanding and resolution. Ad hominem attacks, where individuals dismiss arguments by attacking the character or background of the person instead of addressing the substance of their claims, are common. These attacks can undermine serious discussion and reduce complex political debates to personal quarrels. Straw man fallacies are also prevalent, where one side misrepresents the other's argument to make it easier to attack. For instance, Israeli policies might be simplified as purely oppressive without acknowledging the security concerns they address, or Palestinian actions might be labeled as purely terrorist without recognizing the political and social dimensions of resistance. These misrepresentations prevent a nuanced understanding of the issues and reduce the likelihood of finding common ground. False dilemmas, presenting the conflict in binary choices, such as peace versus security, or resistance versus surrender, ignore the complex realities and the spectrum of possibilities for resolution. These fallacies polarize opinions and force parties into extreme positions, making compromise and dialogue more difficult.
6.0 Metaphysics. Research objective. Explore how existential questions about statehood, identity, and community impact the philosophical orientations of the conflicting parties. Research question. How do existential questions about statehood, identity, and community impact the philosophies of the conflicting parties?
Metaphysics. Existential questions of statehood, identity, and community profoundly impact the philosophical stances of both Israelis and Palestinians, driving much of the rhetoric and justifications for each side's actions in the conflict. For Israelis, the state's existence is seen not just as a political necessity but as a metaphysical imperative, intertwined with historical narratives and religious prophecies. This perception is rooted in a millennia-long history of persecution and displacement, culminating in the Holocaust, which underscores the existential need for a secure homeland. This view fosters a strong link between national identity and survival, influencing policies and public sentiment towards the conflict. For Palestinians, existential questions revolve around their right to return, national independence, and the preservation of their community in the face of displacement and occupation. Palestinian identity is heavily shaped by the experiences of the Nakba, the catastrophe of 1948, ongoing occupation, and the struggle for international recognition. These experiences frame their collective memory and national aspirations, influencing their approach to peace talks, international diplomacy, and internal governance. These metaphysical considerations affect not only political negotiations but also how each community views the possibility of coexistence and peace. They shape the narratives taught in schools, the stories covered in the media, and the speeches of political leaders, perpetuating a cycle of conflict where existential security is seen as zero-sum.
7.0 Current ideology and issues. Research objective. Examine the role of contemporary ideological trends such as nationalism, liberalism, and religious fundamentalism in shaping the strategies and solutions proposed by both sides. Research question. What role do current ideological trends, such as nationalism or liberalism, play in shaping the strategies and solutions proposed by both sides?
Current ideology and issues. Current ideological trends, such as nationalism and liberalism, play significant roles in shaping the strategies and potential solutions proposed by both Israelis and Palestinians. Nationalism, with its emphasis on self-determination, territorial integrity, and cultural cohesion, reinforces hardline policies and resistance to compromise on both sides. In Israel, nationalist sentiments often manifest in strong support for settlement expansions and military responses to security threats, driven by a narrative of Jewish historical and biblical claims to the land. For Palestinians, nationalism fuels the pursuit of statehood, return of refugees, and resistance against Israeli policies, framed as a struggle for national survival and rights. Liberalism influences the conflict by introducing values of democracy, human rights, and international law into the discourse. In Israeli politics, liberal values challenge the occupation and advocate for equal rights for Palestinians, pressing for policies that align with democratic ideals and respect for human rights. Among Palestinians, liberal influences are evident in the emphasis on civil rights, justice, and international solidarity, which shape their appeals to the international community and their own governance structures. These ideologies not only inform domestic policies and political platforms but also shape the international community's engagement with the conflict. They influence diplomatic interactions, the framing of peace proposals, and the international legal arguments deployed by both sides, reflecting broader global ideological currents and their intersections with local political realities.
8.0 Decolonization. Research objective. Apply the concept of decolonization to understand the aspirations of Palestinians and the state-building processes of Israel. Research question. How does the concept of decolonization apply to the aspirations of Palestinians and the state-building processes of Israel?
Decolonization. The concept of decolonization holds distinct and potent meanings for both Palestinians and Israelis, reflecting their unique historical trajectories and contemporary political aspirations. For Palestinians, decolonization is a straightforward yet profound call for the end of Israeli occupation of the West Bank and Gaza, the dismantling of settlements, and the establishment of a fully sovereign Palestinian state. This perspective aligns with classical anti-colonial struggles worldwide, emphasizing the right to self-determination, national independence, and the return of displaced populations. Palestinians frame their national narrative around themes of liberation from foreign control, restoration of rights, and justice for historical grievances, which resonate deeply with global decolonization movements. In contrast, the Israeli narrative of decolonization is complex and rooted in the Zionist philosophy of returning to an ancient homeland from which Jews were historically exiled. From this perspective, the establishment of Israel is seen as a form of decolonization, reclaiming a lost territory from which they were displaced by various empires and colonial powers over millennia. This narrative posits that Jewish connection to the land predates the modern concept of colonialism, framing their national project not as colonial but as an anti-colonial return to their indigenous homeland. However, the subsequent occupation of Palestinian territories after the 1967 war introduces a conflicting dimension to this narrative, often perceived by the international community and Palestinians as a form of settler colonialism. This duality within the Israeli decolonization narrative complicates its international reception and shapes its domestic and foreign policies, particularly regarding the peace process and relations with Palestinians. Decolonization, therefore, involves a complex interplay of historical narratives, national identities, and international laws, which both sides use to justify their actions and claims. For Palestinians, it demands a reversion of post-1967 occupations and recognition of their national rights. For Israelis, it involves navigating the security and demographic imperatives of maintaining a Jewish state while addressing the rights and aspirations of Palestinians. The decolonization discourse influences peace negotiations, international diplomacy, and the political strategies of both sides, reflecting a deeply rooted conflict over land, identity, and history. In summary, the Israeli-Palestinian conflict encompasses a multitude of philosophical dimensions that significantly influence the entrenched narratives and existential questions at the core of both communities' identities. The interplay of Zionism and Palestinian nationalism not only shapes their claims to land and nationhood but also permeates their social, psychological, and political realms. Ethical dilemmas, psychological impacts, epistemological frameworks, and logical discourses all contribute to the complex landscape of the conflict. Moreover, the notion of decolonization adds a layer of complexity, embodying different meanings and historical contexts for each side. Understanding and addressing this deeply philosophical and existential dispute requires more than mere political negotiation. It necessitates a comprehensive approach that considers the philosophical underpinnings driving both communities. Only through such an inclusive approach can sustainable dialogue and potential pathways toward peace be effectively explored.
Okay, so now let's start our video. On January 13, 1898, in the courtyard of the French Military Academy, the French military court publicly stripped Officer Dreyfus of his rank. His epaulettes, cap insignia, and armbands were all removed, and his sword of honor was broken. Dreyfus was accused of treason because the French intelligence suspected him of colluding with Germany. In reality, this case was entirely fabricated, and Dreyfus was framed simply because he was Jewish. In the courtroom, the spectators were not concerned with whether Dreyfus was truly a traitor. Anti-Semitic sentiments echoed throughout the court. This case ultimately divided France into two camps and profoundly impacted late 19th century French society. The deep-seated malice towards Jews shocked an Austro-Hungarian journalist named Herzl, who later wrote in his diary, "The Dreyfus case is not merely a judicial error. It reflects the psychology of the vast majority of French people." As the insignia was removed from Captain Dreyfus's uniform, a crowd shouted anti-Semitic slogans, causing anti-Semitic sentiments to surge. After this shocking trial, Herzl, who previously did not care about the plight of Jews, became convinced that there was no hope for changing the situation of Jews in other countries. For Jews to survive, they needed their own state. About 3,400 years ago, the oppressed Hebrews, led by their leader Moses, fled Egypt in search of the promised land of Canaan. However, Canaan was not an uninhabited land. The Canaanites had lived there for a long time. To the locals, the Hebrews were unwelcome intruders, whom they referred to as foreign beggars. A protracted war ensued, and by around 900 BCE, the Hebrews established the Kingdom of Israel in this land. The Hebrews were very satisfied with this land they had gained, and the name Canaan quickly disappeared from history, later being called Palestine. Palestine is located in Western Asia, on the eastern coast of the Mediterranean Sea, covering an area of about 27,000 square kilometers. Despite its small size, it is a rare plateau in the West Asian continent. The eastern mountains block the dry air of West Asia, making Palestine like an oasis in the desert, which greatly attracted the ancient Hebrews. However, while God gave Palestine its fertile land, he also gave it a special location, making Palestine the crossroads of West Asia, standing at the intersection of three continents: Asia, Europe, and Africa. The Hebrews soon realized the strategic advantages of Palestine, located at the intersection of the Tigris-Euphrates and Nile River basins. Soon, Jews discovered their wealth secret. Since ancient times, Jews have had a natural inclination for commerce, but relying on commerce alone could not secure their land. Typically, fertile central regions give birth to two kinds of nations: those who invade others and those who get invaded. Unfortunately, Jews belong to the latter. Since the discovery of Palestine, any emerging power in Eurasia and Africa aimed to expand its influence in Palestine. Throughout thousands of years of history, Babylonians, Persians, Greeks, Romans, Crusaders, and Ottomans took turns occupying Palestine, and for Jews, fighting against these empires was like ants trying to shake a tree. In 722 BCE, the Kingdom of Israel was destroyed by Assyria. In 586 BCE, the Kingdom of Judah was destroyed by Babylon, and Jews were no longer the masters of Palestine. Given the antiquity of this history, it might be hard for everyone to grasp, so let's put it in Chinese terms. The Hebrews arrived in Canaan before King Wu of Zhou's campaign against King Zhou of Shang. The Kingdom of Judah was destroyed during the spring and autumn period, and compared to them, even Qin Shi Huang would be considered a latecomer. In human history, the proportion of vanished nations is like the ratio of air to chips in a bag. Normally, when people talk about Jews today, they should only be able to say currently doing well. However, Jews are special. To realize the dream of returning to Canaan, Jews significantly strengthened their Jewish faith. After the destruction of their state, Judaism became particularly important. In 115 CE, after the failure of their last rebellion against the Roman Empire, Jews entered the period of Great Diaspora. Emperor Hadrian of Rome carried out a brutal massacre of Jews, forcing almost all Jews to flee Palestine and scatter worldwide. However, the scattered Jews did not assimilate into local populations,
and continued to maintain their language and religion. During Europe's long Middle Ages, Jews appeared highly reliable as commercial intermediaries due to their exclusion and discrimination by various feudal lords, making them ideal for commerce. However, a minority group characterized by religious differences and perceived greed was bound to face discrimination. In ancient Europe, Jews were likened to lepers morally. Although Jews amassed enormous wealth through commerce, their status was akin to that of outcasts. Deep-rooted anti-Semitism developed across the European continent, with Jews enduring massacres and expulsions until the modern era. Jews saw a glimmer of hope during the 18th century French Revolution. As a monumental advancement in human civilization, the concept of natural rights became a consensus post-French Revolution. In France, Jews were granted equal citizenship rights for the first time. Napoleon's army later spread this concept by force across Europe. For Jews, France became their beacon of hope. However, in 1895, when Herzl witnessed the fierce denunciation of Jews by the French, he felt profound despair. Discrimination on paper can be erased, but barriers in people's hearts are difficult to remove. If Jews could hardly survive in the most civilized France, they must seek a place where they are not a minority. In 1896, Herzl wrote The Jewish State, an attempt at a modern solution of the Jewish question, formally proposing the establishment of a Jewish state. Herzl's ideas resonated with many Jews of his time. When Herzl communicated with Jews worldwide, the feedback was overwhelmingly enthusiastic. It was as if the brothers were all still around, just scattered in various places. Pinsker in Eastern Europe and Nordau in Germany all said, "We are ready. Just raise the flag." Herzl knew well that he had a pure heart, with the sole aim of Jewish revival. In 1897, under Herzl's leadership, the First World Zionist Congress was held in Basel, Switzerland, marking the official start of the Zionist movement. The first issue facing Jews was, where should we establish our state? At the time, Jews had three options: Argentina, Uganda, and Palestine. Each option posed significant challenges. Argentina was proposed by Americans. In the late 19th century, the United States suggested that Jews could establish their state on the Patagonian Plateau in southern Argentina, an area covering 630,000 square kilometers without indigenous inhabitants, making it seem like an ideal location. However, when Herzl visited Argentina for an on-site inspection, he discovered why there were no indigenous inhabitants. The place had extremely low temperatures, high winds, and poor climate. Realizing this, the Argentina plan was abandoned. The second option was proposed by Britain in 1903. Chamberlain, not yet Prime Minister, suggested, if you need, Britain can offer 13,000 square kilometers in Uganda for a fee. This proposal greatly tempted Herzl, as Uganda had good soil and climate. In 1904, Herzl personally visited Uganda, only to find it inhabited by many indigenous people, which could pose communication difficulties. Furthermore, the surrounding economic development levels were low, leading to the rejection of the Uganda plan. Thus, only one option remained. For Jews, Palestine always held a deep emotional connection as their spiritual homeland in history. Although they had been away for millennia, the land continued to attract them. Over the years, there had been a steady Jewish return to Palestine. After thorough discussions, the Jewish Congress unanimously agreed that only by returning to their ancestral homeland in Palestine could Jews find happiness and peace. At the Congress, Herzl publicly recited a verse from the Bible, "If I forget thee, O Jerusalem, let my right hand forget its skill." However, Jews did not immediately rush back to Palestine to establish a state, knowing how difficult this task was. At the time, Jews had no land or army, making the task of building a state in Palestine as difficult as an ordinary person marrying a celebrity. Therefore, the Jewish Congress did not expect to rely solely on themselves, but actively sought support from world leaders, hoping for assistance from a major power. The most influential country at the time was Britain. Located at the crossroads of three continents, the Middle East had a complex ethnic and religious composition, which Britain saw as beneficial. The first opportunity for intervention arose during World War I. Before the war, the Ottoman Empire and Britain maintained good relations. However, through a series of strategies during World War I, the British leadership managed to align the Ottomans with the German-Austrian alliance, leading to the famous historical joke, Churchill, the founding father of the Soviet Union. Following Germany's defeat, the Ottoman Empire also faced the fate of a defeated nation. Britain and France had long coveted the vast Ottoman territories, with Britain particularly eager to transform the Middle East into a second India. Britain's ability to grow from a small island nation to a global empire was due to its exceptional skills. Historically, Britain excelled in two areas: unparalleled diplomatic ability, and perfect espionage application. Britain's talent for causing chaos was extraordinary. They understood that swallowing a large territory in one gulp was impossible, and instead relied on creating discord and exploiting opportunities. Furthermore, Britain thoroughly studied colonial customs and power structures. Rather than brute force, they used strategies to achieve the maximum benefit at minimal cost. In the Middle East complex situation, Britain quickly established a principle of division and control, creating numerous new nations: Syria, Iraq, Jordan, Lebanon, among others. During boundary demarcations, identical ethnic groups were split into several countries, while different sects were forced into one government. Many tribal leaders were handpicked by Britain to become kings. What had been relatively peaceful under Ottoman rule turned into a fragmented and conflict-ridden region. The current turmoil in the Middle East can largely be traced back to British actions. Britain's handling of Palestine perfectly exemplified their talent for causing discord. In 1917, during World War I, Britain sought Jewish support while also aiming to disrupt the Middle East. British Foreign Secretary Balfour wrote to the Zionist Federation, stating, "His Majesty's government views with favor the establishment in Palestine of a national home for the Jewish people, and will use their best endeavors to facilitate the achievement of this object." This was the famous Balfour Declaration in Zionist history. Following its release, Jews worldwide rejoiced as their dream finally gained support from a major power. However, Jews were unaware that Britain had promised Palestine to three different parties. In 1914, Britain promised Arabs that if they helped the Allies dismantle the Ottoman Empire, Britain would support the establishment of an independent Arab state, including Palestine. In 1916, Britain and France signed the Sykes-Picot Agreement, stipulating that Palestine would be internationally administered. Following World War I, British troops occupied the entire region. When it came time to fulfill one of the three promises, which did Britain choose? None of them. Instead, they split Palestine into two, establishing a puppet state, Transjordan, east of the Jordan River and directly governing the west. Encouraged by the Balfour Declaration, global Jews began migrating to Palestine. By 1939, the Jewish population had surged from 50,000 to over 400,000, forming large Jewish settlements. As Britain and Jews were busy planning Palestine, one group's opinion was ignored: the native inhabitants. Jews were not discriminated against by Middle Eastern Arabs and coexisted peacefully. Therefore, compared to Christians, many Jews considered Muslims friendlier. However, when Jews claimed Palestine as their spiritual homeland, local Arabs found it intolerable. 2,000 years ago, Jews left Palestine. 1,300 years ago, Arabs settled there and never left, living there for generations. For local Arabs, the Jewish claim to Palestine seemed as absurd as someone declaring a land theirs based on ancient legends. Following the Balfour Declaration, besides enthusiastic global Jewish support, the United States also quickly expressed support due to Jewish influence. Encouraged by British and American backing, Jews began massive immigration to Palestine. Within 20 years, Jews established communities, universities, and synagogues in Palestine. By 1939, Jewish-controlled industries accounted for 80% of Palestine's industry, severely impacting local Arab businesses. When ethnic, religious, and spatial conflicts combined, Arab anger was inevitable. From 1920 to 1939, three major anti-Jewish incidents occurred in Palestine. All Arabs were mobilized, targeting Jews, Britons, and pro-Jewish Arabs. Zionists responded to Arab violence with terrorist attacks. Since Britain's occupation of Palestine, ethnic slaughter became the main theme. Both Jews and Arabs could list each other's massacres. To quell the situation, Britain, with only 10,000 troops in India, deployed 20,000 in 1.25 million populated Palestine. In 1936, Britain attempted a compromise proposed by Husseini, suggesting separate Jewish and Arab states within Palestine. Jews welcomed this, but Arabs firmly rejected it. For Arabs, this was their home, and sharing half of it was unacceptable. In 1939, World War II broke out, making the Suez Canal security and Middle Eastern oil supply vital for Britain. Britain then saw Arabs as more valuable allies than Jews. Consequently, Britain reversed its previous support for Jewish immigration, strictly limiting it and stating that if Arabs did not agree, Jews would be banned from entering. Britain's stance essentially announced that Palestine belonged to Jews, breaching Balfour's promise. However, Britain played word games, telling Jews, "I promised you a national home, not a national state. I'll give you a home, but didn't say there'd be no one else in it." Jews realized they couldn't challenge Britain. As fascists ravaged Europe, Jews faced their darkest hour. By 1945, With the end of World War II and the liberation of concentration camps, the world witnessed the fate of 6 million Jews, shocking humanity. Global support for Zionism surged, leaning towards helping Jews establish a state. But this didn't mean Arabs would accept them. In 1945, Roosevelt met Saudi King Ibn Saud, discussing the Jewish state concept. Ibn Saud told Roosevelt, "I sympathize with Jews' tragic plight and support their statehood idea. However, since Germans persecuted Jews, the land for their state should come from Germany. Arabs didn't persecute Jews, so why should we sacrifice Arab land?" Roosevelt understood, but global circumstances required a Jewish state. In the post-World War II years, more Zionists arrived in Palestine, escalating local violence. Britain's ability to suppress diminished, and Jews realized they couldn't build a state with Britain's cooperation. Israeli Prime Minister Golda Meir said, "Britain always told us Arabs could cause much trouble, so we must yield. We decided to cause more trouble." Starting in late 1945, Jews launched terror attacks on British and Arabs. As Palestine's conflict worsened, Britain, unable to maintain control, announced in February 1947 that it would relinquish its mandate over Palestine, referring the issue to the United Nations. This turned the Palestine issue from a tripartite Arab-Jewish-British conflict into an international issue. The post-World War II United Nations founding principle was self-determination. However, the UN's handling of the Palestine issue had flexible moral standards, disregarding Palestinian opinions. Instead, countries chose sides in New York, either supporting Arabs or Jews. The UN's 5 permanent members were Britain, the US, the USSR, France, and China. However, only the US, the USSR, and Britain had real influence. Britain claimed neutrality but leaned towards Arabs to maintain its influence in the Middle East. The US supported Jews, driven by American Jewish influence. Strategically, supporting Israel could challenge Britain's entrenched influence in Arab kingdoms. Amidst Anglo-American support for opposing sides, the USSR's stance was crucial. Initially, the USSR opposed Zionism, fearing it might divert Soviet Jews. But post-World War II, the USSR saw Jews differently. Zionist efforts to prove their Western influence and the USSR's need to rebuild without conflict with the US led the USSR to support Jews. Additionally, Arabs' World War II collaboration with Hitler and hostility to communism made Jews, who allowed communist activities, more favorable. Recognizing their shared interests, the USSR decided to support Jews. In 1947, the UN debated the Palestine issue, and under USSR Delegate Gromyko's insistence, the Jewish Agency participated in the General Assembly as a non-state entity. The UN Special Committee on Palestine published its report on August 31 and September 1, 1947. The report proposed 2 plans, a minority plan for a federal state and a majority plan, which became the controversial UN Resolution 181. The majority plan proposed partitioning Palestine into separate Arab and Jewish states. The plan allocated 43% of the land, about 11,000 square kilometers, to an Arab state with 800,000 people, and 57%, about 15,000 square kilometers, to a Jewish state with 1.1 million people. Jerusalem would be internationalized. Population-wise, the plan seemed fair, but it allocated more fertile plains to Jews and fragmented mountains to Arabs. Despite its apparent unfairness, the plan was approved on November 29, 1947, with 33 votes for, 13 against, and 10 abstentions, supported by the US and the USSR. In 1945, Egypt, Iraq, Jordan, Lebanon, Saudi Arabia, Syria, and Yemen formed the Arab League in Cairo to fight for Arab interests. To them, the UN resolution was an act of robbery. The League members strongly opposed and walked out in protest. However, their protests were in vain. The UN resolution ignited celebrations among Jews and fury among Arabs in Palestine. The ensuing violent clashes led to the Deir Yassin massacre by Jewish extremists, killing over 250 Arabs, mostly women and children. 3 days later, Arabs retaliated with the Hadassah Medical Convoy massacre, killing 78 Jews, including doctors and nurses. The UN resolution brought no peace, but turned Palestine into a battleground. In the first 6 weeks after the resolution, Jerusalem saw 46 deaths daily due to violence. The violence extended beyond Palestine, affecting the entire Arab world. 8 days after the resolution, Arab League leaders met in Cairo to discuss armed intervention. With the UN resolution seen as unjust, the League united to fight for Palestine. Britain's motivation to manage Palestine waned, and they began withdrawing troops by April 1948, despite the UN deadline of August 1. With British troops gone, Palestine descended into chaos. Nazi remnants and Jewish immigrants flocked to Palestine with weapons. Jewish leaders debated whether to declare statehood immediately after the British withdrawal, knowing it might trigger Arab intervention. Delaying the declaration risked losing American support due to Arab opposition. On May 14, 1948, at 9 a.m., the last British troops left Palestine. At 5 p.m., the Zionist Council held a national meeting at the Tel Aviv Art Museum, where Ben-Gurion solemnly declared the establishment of the Jewish state of Israel. The name Israel, meaning struggle with God, resonated deeply with Jews. In tears, they sang hymns, praising their newfound homeland. Ben-Gurion knew that statehood did not mean peace. Arab retaliation was imminent. The answer came within a day. On May 15th, the Arab League announced it would not recognize Israel and declared war. Israel was diplomatically isolated, with only Guatemala, the U.S., and the USSR recognizing it within the first 3 days. On May 15th, 40,000 Arab League troops from the northeast, south, and southwest attacked Israel, marking the start of the First Arab-Israeli War. Despite having a military, Israel's forces were mostly guerrilla level with limited heavy weaponry, while the Arab League had well-equipped regular armies with tanks and aircraft. Initially, Arab forces advanced rapidly, nearing Tel Aviv and capturing Jerusalem's Old City. Lebanon advanced from the north, threatening key towns. Military experts predicted Israel's collapse within 10 days. Amidst the chaos, Israel resorted to guerrilla tactics. When Egyptian troops neared Jerusalem, a small Jewish unit infiltrated behind enemy lines and disrupted their supply, causing Egypt to retreat. Despite such tactics, Israel faced severe challenges by June. Desperate, Ben-Gurion appealed to the UN for an immediate ceasefire. The US called for a Security Council vote, opposed by Britain. Ultimately, Britain conceded under US-Soviet pressure, and on June 11, 1948, the UN passed a resolution for a 4-week ceasefire, prohibiting arms sales to both sides. Arabs accepted the ceasefire, but soon realized the war's complexity. During this crucial ceasefire, Israel mobilized global Jewish support. Israel identified weaknesses in the Arab forces. Despite their numbers and equipment, they lacked training and experienced officers. In contrast, Jewish volunteers from around the world, including World War II veterans, significantly bolstered Israel's combat capabilities. Israel urgently needed arms. Golda Meir's emotional appeal in the U.S. raised $80 million for Israel, but acquiring weapons was challenging due to the UN embargo. Even the U.S., despite supporting Israel, refused to sell arms. Surprisingly, countries like Canada also declined. Desperate, Israel turned to France, where de Gaulle unofficially provided a cache of German arms and even 36 fighter jets. Czechoslovakia also supplied significant quantities of arms and ammunition. With this crucial aid, Israel could finally counter the Arab forces. As the ceasefire ended on July 8, 1948, the Arab League resumed its offensive. However, Israel launched a counterattack, reclaiming key territories. Despite initial support, Arab forces' weaknesses became apparent. British-backed Arab armies, poorly equipped and uncoordinated, failed to match the experienced Jewish fighters. Seeking Soviet support, Israel received substantial aid from Eastern European countries. As World War II veterans and newly acquired arms bolstered Israel's forces, Arab resistance crumbled. By December 1948, the Arab League withdrew, and Israel emerged victorious from the First Arab-Israeli War. The armistice left Jordan controlling Jerusalem's Old City and the West Bank, Egypt occupying Gaza, and Israel securing 70% of the territory. An Arab general lamented, "Jews fought without regard for territory, engaging in hand-to-hand combat everywhere." Indeed, facing overwhelming odds, Jews relied on small units to achieve decisive victories. Having endured its first war, Israel finally secured its foothold. Jerusalem, a city central to billions' hearts, again became a global focal point. Yet, this ancient city, witnessing countless rises and falls, will prove a timeless truth. One may win battles but never secure eternal peace.
May I stand unshaken amidst the crash of the world. Did I hear a thunder? Did I hear you breathe? I can't quite remember just what guided you been? Where you been? I once was standing tall. Now I feel my back against the wall. May I stand unshaken. I'm Mr. Crash of the world. May I stand unshaken. I'm Mr. Crash of the world. The morning lights, when it comes to me, it was there, but I could not see. Am I the wonder as the wayward son? Will the hunter be hunted by the smoking gun? Oh, may I stand unshaken. I'm Mr. Crash of the world.